Just recapping, inspection of schools was ended in the 1970s, and there were numerous reviews and reports suggesting something should happen. But nothing did, and ideas of appraising teachers were torpedoed by either disagreement or teacher opposition. So for over 30 years, there was no quality assurance of teacher performance. Funnily enough, the trigger for change in my own state of Tasmania wasn't the arguments of learned academics, chairmen of inquiries or teachers, but this man. Steve Randell's conviction raised the question of verification of fit and proper people to be left in charge of children. Within no time, the Tasmanian Parliament passed the Teachers Registration Act that focused on good character, but also tasked the TRB with the development and improvement of teaching standards. This was the first mention of teaching standards in recent Tasmanian history. In the legislation, the Teachers Registration Board was tasked to accredit courses, register teachers, including a police good character check, prepare teacher standards, and advance the profession of teaching. It took until 2007 for the standards to appear. That's 7 years after the legislation was passed. So, where were these standards most used? Principally as part of graduate certification in the School of Education at UTAS. To some extent, this was simply due to the administrative burden of checking qualifications and police checks, what dominated the work of the TRB, and registering and accounting undertaken by a reasonably small organisation. That the standards appeared at all is testimony to application. However, even when defined beyond graduate, the incentive to apply for competency, the next stage up, was personal professional pride only. Many just went on paying the fees for a base level certification. Meanwhile, with a mature teaching force in the state, with the average age of around 47 even today, most had full registration by virtue of their previous service. So they didn't have to do anything apart from pay their membership dues. However, around that period, and we're looking here at 2007-8, things were moving at the national level, with the signing of the Melbourne Declaration, to which we can trace not just the national curriculum, but also agreed national objectives of fostering and supporting quality teaching. Note particularly there in the blue that it is not just the schools but also universities who are seen as having a role in the support of high quality pedagogy. It was the Melbourne Declaration that moved the process to the next step of national standards and led to the formation of the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership, known as AITSL. As the slide says, AITSL was established on the 1st of January 2010 to provide national leadership for the Commonwealth, state and territory governments in promoting excellence in the profession of teaching and school leadership. And at the moment it's currently focused on school teaching, but it's quite likely that AITSL will be the overarching organisation to look at VET standards as well. But so far they haven't progressed further on that. There is actually a group of people who would like to see the current teacher standards that AITSL has established turned into something that applies to the vocational education sector as well. AITSL itself is interesting in that it is not a department, but it is set up as a company, the shareholders of which are the federal government and the states. So it means it sits outside the political structure. So when people talk about any changes being made, it's highly unlikely because nobody actually has any political capital in the organisation. And it's probably the first time in my lifetime that I've seen sort of like a bipartisan structure like this set up outside the system, and in fact very much a federal type body. A key point in the professional standards that AITSL put together was the restatement of the Melbourne Declaration. All right, so it takes the Melbourne Declaration as the baseline, and it sets that schools, sectors, individuals, universities and governments all need to work together to support high quality teaching. The purpose of the standards are listed here, and if you note at the red, it's sort of abbreviated down. You know, the first thing is that they make explicit the elements of high quality effective teaching, and they present a common understanding and language for discourse about teaching and education. I personally view the common language as a key element because the standards overcome what you could call the balkanisation or sort of like itty-bittying of teaching into separate subjects which might lay claim to a particular uniqueness. So, for example, a materials design and technology teacher can now be compared to a maths teacher, to a home ec teacher, to a teacher of Chinese. The specialisation of the professional area is not the issue but the pedagogy. Based on the standards, I should be able to go into a science classroom as an English teacher and observe and discuss teaching. Or indeed, I should be able to go into a vet class and evaluate teaching quality without being a specialist in the professional field. It's about teaching, not plumbing, hospitality, maths or science. The professionalisation objective is also important if we as teachers expect to raise the status of teaching and its remuneration. Accountants, doctors and nurses all have professional standards bodies to which practitioners are answerable for quality practice. The last point there of professional accountability is one that will worry some. The fact is that some teachers are below standard and they're currently able to practice without consideration of the impact on students' lives. Such teachers will be in the memories of all established teachers. You can remember when you were a student thinking back to who were your really, really poor teachers. As an example, in my doctoral research, a student told me his mother asked who he had as a teacher. The child replied and the mother laughed, responding, "Her? She was hopeless when she taught me at school." Alternatively, where a senior teacher is called in because of classroom management issues, the focus can be moved away from behaviour management to pedagogy. Because poor classroom behaviours and quality of teaching are directly related, we cannot solve the management problem unless we also deal with the teaching. We have to treat the cause and not the symptom. And this is something that happens constantly in schools where teachers are seen to lose control of classrooms. It's not an issue of control, it's about teaching quality and about educational relevance. When you actually have a look at the National Professional Standards for Teachers, you'll see that it's broken down into the key areas, the standards, and then you break it down into the focus areas. So it breaks down, if something simple as know students how they learn, to the key components of that standard itself. So what are the focus areas? And then it sets out the levels between graduate, proficient, highly accomplished and lead. So it gives a sort of like a map of what is teaching performance quality across all areas. No doubt one of the issues about teacher acceptance of the standards and the associated processes is that it's top-down. It's been developed and imposed by government. However, teachers could have done it for themselves. The National Board of Professional Teaching Standards in the United States was set up in 1987 by educators external of governments and schools. Since that time, this independent organisation has certified accomplished teachers through a rigorous peer assessment process. Recognition of the quality of certified teachers means that schools and states offer incentives to participate in certification. A National Board of Professional Teaching Standards teachers are in high demand. And as you can see there on the slide, from that small beginning, they've got themselves up to about 91,000 teachers, which is not a lot in the United States, but it still means that the organisation is growing and its work is continuing. The National Board of Professional Teaching Standards bases itself around 5 core propositions, and those of you who are familiar with teaching standards will be able to identify some common themes. And if you look, it says teachers are committed to students and learning. Teachers know the subjects they teach and how to teach those subjects to students. Teachers monitor student learning. There's a typo there. And teachers think systematically about their practice. And lastly, teachers are members of learning communities. I find the 5 core propositions useful, quick motivational statements to have around when reflecting on my practice. Or you might break it down to say that I need to be a committed, knowledgeable, responsible, collegially reflective teacher. And that doesn't matter whether I'm teaching kindergarten, whether I'm teaching vet, or whether I'm teaching university. These principles apply across the whole educational sphere. The breaking down of that simple statement I made is what it's all about. What does it mean for me to be knowledgeable? If I graduated into a discipline area 20 years ago and the furthest I've gone in that time is a grade 10 textbook, then can I say I'm indeed knowledgeable about my subject? If I haven't undertaken professional learning that's challenged me and I teach class X the same as I did 10 years ago, can I genuinely claim that I know how to teach in a contemporary environment? If I can extract an experience from my Dip Ed studies, a colleague who started an education course 10 years previous but withdrawn for family reasons. When he was in my cohort, he submitted exactly the same essay in response to exactly the same question by the same lecturers 10 years apart and received exactly the same mark. Now, you could claim that this demonstrates reliability in assessment, but it could also indicate stagnation. And those of you who are working in the vet sector will say there is a completely different situation in vocational education, because if you are teaching electrics or construction, you need to be certified as industry current. And that's a big difference between the school sector and the vet sector, and something that I think the vet people really deserve huge amounts of praise for. If you teach something, then you can do it. If you are teaching cooking, then you are a chef and you are a certified chef. Whereas in a school situation, you might be a historian who never teaches history, or you might be a science teacher who never actually does science. Practicing what you preach is a good way to be. But the critical understanding is that the AITSL standards, which we generally refer to now as the National Professional Standards for Teachers, and the evaluation and verification of practice are not about power and control. If you take on that perspective, then you're getting down sort of a bit of a dark black path of depression, because you'll see everybody against you. I prefer to think, and I encourage you to think, that they're a re-establishment of society of the quality assurance of teaching that disappeared in the 1970s. It's not a sudden grab for power, but there is a result of 20 years of research, theorising, examining, inquiring, debating and thinking. What dictates their value is how we use them. And no doubt those of you in vocational education at the moment will say, well, we have audit. That may be the case, however, audit looks at different areas than your actual pedagogy. And the question of teaching standards for the profession in the vocational education sector is something that's going to be around. So if you understand a little about the National Professional Standards for Teachers and some other standards that you'll be introduced to in this course that have to do with teaching, I think what it will do is it will set you up for one of those inevitable developments that is coming down the track over the next few years. And the more you understand it, the better you'll be able to use them in a positive way to improve your teaching and your students' learning.